Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday and Ramadan Kareem. My name is Dina Salem. I'm the secretary of the Greater Los Angeles chapter of the Worldwide Alumni Association of AUB. And thank you all for joining us today for today's webinar, A Ramadan Outlook on Intermittent Fasting. We have such a great turnout today, literally from across the globe: LA, San Diego, Ladera Ranch, British Columbia, New York, Boston, Beirut, London, and even Dubai. Wow. Lara, you're a hit. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge all our chapter members who have joined us today, including the president of our chapter, Ms. Wafa Hubballah. We are very fortunate to have Lara, a candidate like Lara, actually address the issue of Ramadan and intermittent fasting. Lara who is also the vice president of the chapter, is a registered dietitian nutritionist, board certified in diabetes management, and she currently works at one of the biggest medical institutions in California. Before we begin, I would like to remind you all to keep your microphones on mute. You will have a chance to ask questions during the Q&A session, either by dropping Lara a line in the chat box or by raising your hand. And without further ado, Lara, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Dina, for the nice introduction. Thank you, everybody, for calling in. I'm very happy to have you all on board. I hope this webinar will be informative as well as fun for you all, and I promise you to go through all the questions at the end. So we will be starting now, and Ramadan Kareem for everybody who's fasting. So today we'll be talking about the scientific overview of intermittent fasting and Ramadan fasting. So in other words, we'll be talking about the health benefits of fasting. And Ramadan fasting is a form of intermittent fasting, as we will speak about it more in details. So before I talk about different studies, and I would like to start with a small closure that I do not represent any institution in my talk. This is all within my own capacity, and all my scientific data is from the National Library of Medicine. So before we discuss different studies, I would like to speak about the energy metabolism. So this is an important point, so we know what's going on in our body when we fast. So we, like any other microorganism, we require energy to function. So that energy we get from food, macronutrient and macronutrients. So basically mainly carbohydrates, starch and sugar in food turn into glucose, which is the source of energy for our body. But for our cells, whether brain cells, muscle cells, organ cells, get the glucose they need, we require insulin. So it's a hormone that we need for being healthy, to get the glucose, the energy we need. So we can't get that glucose from food right away into our cells. We require insulin that helps move the glucose from the bloodstream into our body cells. So there are 5 types of feeding / fasting: the normal feeding with no restriction, the calorie restriction, the intermittent fasting that we'll be talking about more in details, and Ramadan fasting, which is a form of intermittent fasting, and prolonged fasting and starvation, which is more than 24 hours. And that would be like the more extreme form of fasting. So in the Ramadan perspective, intermittent fasting, it's an intermittent fasting practiced by millions of Muslims that entails a major shift from normal eating into nocturnal eating. So it's an intermittent fasting time, but the time depends on the lunar calendar and the time of the day where we break the fast. So it's the state of intermittent liver glycogen depletion. What's that? What is glycogen? So I did speak about glucose, how we require glucose as a source of energy. We get that from the food. So we eat, we get glucose, the insulin transport that glucose into our cells. So what happens when we fast? Since we're not eating, we're depriving our body from that main source of energy, which is glucose. So in the first few hours of fasting, the body starts breaking down glycogen, which is a form of glucose found in our liver and muscles. So the insulin level is still up a few hours after we start fasting, or from the time we eat the last meal, because we still have glucose on board. But that glucose is not from the food we eat. It's actually from the glycogen in our liver and muscles. At 8 hours from the time we had the last meal, we go into something called gluconeogenesis. So what's that? It's just to make it clear. Fasting is considered 8 hours and above. So 8 hours and less, we still don't consider that fasting. So gluconeogenesis is the production of glucose from the liver. So the difference between the first few hours after we fast is we're still using glucose that we have stored. But at the 8 hours, we still actually produce glucose. So the liver starts making glucose because we don't have any glucose on board anymore. There's no food on board. So this is when we switch into the fasting mode. At the 12 hours, we actually go into a more we start using fat as an energy. So we depleted the glycogen, then we started reducing glucose through gluconeogenesis, and then at 12 hours we start using fat as a source of energy because we do have glucose in our fat cells. So we start using that. So as you can see on this chart, let's say this point is when you actually started eating the meal. So 2 hours after you eat the meal, you are storing fat because you're eating, you're getting glucose, and you're adding that glucose into your fat cells. Once you reach the 8 hours, you start with a little bit of, this is when we said you start producing glucose from your liver. Over here, you started using glycogen. At the 12 hours mark of fasting, this is when you start burning fat. So to go through the mechanism of breaking down the fat into source of energy, you have to fast 12 hours. And as you see, the more you fast, the more fat you burn. So that's a very important point. And so what you're really doing is you're giving your body a break from producing insulin and from switching into a fat breaking mechanism. So intermittent fasting can help with weight loss, but there are other factors to take into consideration. The calorie consumption, the time you break the fast, your own metabolism. Are you on a certain, medication? Are you an athletic that requires to eat frequently? So it's not a white or a black. It's not like it's good or it's bad. It depends on each patient. It depends on the type of fasting and the time you break the fast. So the reason it's good, even if you will see in down the road in the upcoming slides, even if you don't lose weight, you still get some health benefit from fasting. So as we spoke, sugar can enter the cells with insulin. So insulin brings the sugar into the fat cells and keep it there. So between meals, when you're snacking, if you're not snacking, you're giving your body a break from producing insulin. So that's the most important key. Why you lose weight and why it's good for your health is because you're giving your pancreas a break from producing insulin because you don't have glucose on board for the insulin to transport into your cells. So we lose weight if we let our insulin level drops. So the entire idea of intermittent fasting is to allow the insulin levels to go down far enough, long enough, so we can start burning off our fat. So that's the point. So this chart shows you, this is the insulin level and relevant to glucose level. So as you can see in nighttime, you're not eating, you're basically fasting. So your glucose level is steady because there's no glucose on board. There's no food on board. Nothing is being converted to glucose except your liver produced within the normal range. Then your insulin level is low because you have nothing to transport from your blood into your cells. After the first meal, every meal, as you can see, with every meal, you have glucose on board, then you have a higher insulin production. Every time you have an insulin production, you're pushing your pancreas to produce insulin, which is a normal mechanism of the body. But giving that pancreas a break from doing that, you start using the fat if you want to lose weight. So as you can see, the insulin level goes up after each meal, the insulin production, and then it slows down when we don't eat. That's another graph showing that even a small reduction in insulin, so even if you fast, like we said, 8 hours, preferably 12 to go through ketosis, you still break fat. So even if you fast in Ramadan, you break your fast. We are breaking our fast late now. We're probably, I'm including myself, eating a lot of calories, fat and sweets, and we may not lose weight, we may put on some weight, but you're still helping your body during the 16 hours to go through lipolysis, which is healthy for your body to give a break for the pancreas. So the new research findings, not all intermittent fasting are the same. The most effective and sustainable, and this is from an article from Harvard Medical School, it's when it's combined with a plant-based Mediterranean style diet. So you fast and then you eat a healthy diet high in healthy fats, monounsaturated fat, salmon, olive oil, avocados, and plant-based 65% to 70% is plant-based, you get even more benefit. Also, another factor to keep in mind is the timing you fast. The timing of fasting matters. Are you breaking the fast at 10 or you're starting your intermittent fasting at 4 p.m.? So Circadian rhythm. This is a very important biological mechanism in our body. It's basically our day-night cycle. So our metabolism has adapted to daytime food and nighttime sleep. And nighttime eating has been very much associated with many, there's many evidence that it's linked to higher risk of obesity and diabetes. So like I said, we get the benefit of fasting, we break the fast, but then the later we eat, the higher the risk of diabetes and obesity if we don't watch what we eat. That's the key. Microbiome. Why am I talking about microbiome? So what is microbiome? It's the genetic material of our microbes, bacteria, viruses, fungi, protozoa. We all have our own microbiome, just like we have our genome. So we have this bacteria in our body, and it's very important to keep a healthy balance between healthy bacteria and not very healthy bacteria. And the gut bacteria plays a crucial part in our health by maintaining a strong immunity system and digestive system health. So the imbalance of unhealthy and healthy microbes may contribute to weight gain, high blood sugar, high cholesterol, and recently we have studies showing possibly type 1 diabetes. I know this is maybe off this topic, but I would like to mention because it's interesting. So this was a major study comparing kids in Western societies like America and in Africa. And they found that type 1 diabetes is higher in Western society with higher socioeconomic status because we do, and especially in certain ethnicity, white kids, we tend to, want to protect our kids from playing in the dirt. We don't want them to go out. We don't want them to build a strong immunity system. So studies have found that this could have possibly modified their microbiome, which has weakened their immunity system and led to type 1 diabetes, because type 1 is an autoimmune disease. So this is important to mention. I know during the time we have now we're all on, most of us on lockdown for this COVID-19, we're home, we're afraid to catch anything, but I mean, the human nature is we need to be out, we need to build a strong immunity, but that doesn't mean you go out now. This is just off the subject to talk about the importance of microbiome. So the intestinal microbiota, it depends on our circadian rhythm. So in other words, if we eat late and if we eat a diet that's high in fat, we might actually disrupt that microbiome in our system. So it's very important to keep in mind the circadian rhythm. So, and we will talk later about what does this have to do with intermittent fasting. That's the early time restricted feeding. This is a study, it was a small group, but I really liked it because it has interesting outcome, as you can see. So the University of Alabama conducted a small study with a small group of obese men with prediabetes. So they compared a form of intermittent fasting called early time restricted. So they have eaten within the 8-hour interval, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. or a 12-hour, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So as you can see, they stopped eating at 3 p.m. or 7 p.m. So both groups maintained weight. So nobody has gained, nobody lost weight. But after 5 weeks, the 8-hour group, which has fasted obviously for 16 hours because they have eaten within the 8-hour interval, has lowered their insulin level and significantly improved their insulin sensitivity, which is the response of the cell to insulin, how we respond to insulin. We need to have a strong sensitivity to insulin, not resistance. And another really good point that I really liked is it lowered blood pressure. So for men that are obese with prediabetes, when they fast for 16 hours, there's a chance that they will that will help lower their blood pressure and improve their insulin sensitivity, even if their weight doesn't change. So again, it's not just about weight loss. There's a lot of health implication, health benefit to fasting. So just changing the timing of the meals by eating earlier in the day and extending the overnight fast significantly benefited metabolism, even in people who didn't lose 1 pound of weight. So as you can see, it's not just the weight loss. This is a very interesting study published also in NIH. I really liked it because the results are really fantastic. Intermittent fasting from dawn to sunset for 30 consecutive days can be preventive against cancer. So this has been done in a similar way as Ramadan. They fasted from dawn to sunset, exactly what we do, and for 30 consecutive days. So it's a murine study, which is an animal study, certain type of rat, very similar to human. So it showed that disruption of circadian rhythmicity could lead to cancer and metabolic syndrome. So this study was done on healthy subjects, and they fasted, like we said, for 30 days from dawn to sunset. So the fasting, they collected the serum samples for before the fasting, at the end of the 4th week of the fasting and 1 week after the 30th day of intermittent fasting. So what the result has shown, and again, this is like a 10-page publication, so I tried to summarize it in just one slide. So the results showed that 30-day intermittent fasting was associated with anti-cancer serum proteomic signature, DNA repair, and regulation to our immunity system and cognitive function. So we just learned that it helps lower the blood pressure. Now we are finding that it has anti-cancer benefit. It helps with the cell regeneration, that's DNA repair, and possibly improve the immunity system. And I have more exciting news as we go forward about the cognitive function as well. So again, another publication, the effect of intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, and Ramadan intermittent fasting on cognitive performance in adults during exercise. So you might see the word IF, that's intermittent fasting, RIF, that's Ramadan intermittent fasting, and CR is calorie restriction. So we do know about the benefit of exercise. It impacts the brain functioning, but we don't have enough information on intermittent fasting with exercise. Is it helpful or not? But we do have that data here. So moreover, depending on the type of intermittent fasting, cognitive function and physical performance could be either improved or negatively impacted. But this study has shown that calorie restriction was associated with impairment in cognitive function versus intermittent fasting or Ramadan intermittent fasting significantly improved the cognitive function of people in exercise. So intermittent fasting is more beneficial than calorie restriction when it comes to the cognitive performance at rest or during exercise in adults. This would be an exciting study for our fellow women on this forum. It has shown, let me read the title again here. So intermittent fasting protects against deterioration of cognitive function, energy metabolism, and dyslipidemia, which is high cholesterol, high lipid panel, and an Alzheimer's disease-induced estrogen deficient rat. What does it mean? So this is a study done on rats, and it's really, they injected them with Alzheimer or non-Alzheimer. So they divided them into groups. Some rats with a form of beta amyloid that has Alzheimer, other group with no Alzheimer. And they did the estrogen deficient rat, which means they were almost going through menopause. So they divided them into two subgroups with intermittent fasting and other fed ad libitum. Ad libitum is a word we use in research to refer to feeding as desired, so no restriction. So basically we have four groups. Think about it as, I mean, we're not comparing here, but this is, we're not comparing rats to humans at this point, but this is how it is. We have four groups. We have a group with Alzheimer that did intermittent fasting and they have Alzheimer. We have a group that have Alzheimer and they ate as desired. Then we have a group with no Alzheimer, they did intermittent fasting, and a group with no Alzheimer and ad libitum, they ate as desired. So the ones who were fasting, they ate within 3-hour period only. So obviously they fasted for 21 hours. And each group included 10 rats and they were fed high-fat diet. So this is a high-fat diet, even for the ones in intermittent fasting. So the findings are Alzheimer's disease, we know, deteriorated short and spatial memory function compared to non-Alzheimer, whereas intermittent fasting prevented memory loss in comparison to ad libitum. Alzheimer's disease impaired not only the cognitive function, but also disrupted energy, glucose, lipid, and bone metabolism, versus intermittent fasting protected against the deterioration of these metabolic parameters. And also cortisol level, which is stress hormone, were increased by Alzheimer's disease, but decreased in intermittent fasting. So for women in menopause who have a risk of Alzheimer, we did find, even if you have the Alzheimer or not, that intermittent fasting may be beneficial in improving the cognitive function and lowering the stress hormone and help regulating the energy, lipids, and bone metabolism. And I have to tell you, I just picked few articles when I was doing the research through the PubMed. There are hundreds of publications on the benefit of fasting. So this is a topic I can keep talking about for the whole day, but I tried as much as possible to summarize it and give you an overview. And where does Ramadan fit in that? Ramadan is a form of intermittent fasting at the end. But again, when it comes to Ramadan, it has to do with how many calories we're consuming when we break the fast, the time we break the fast, because the circadian rhythm is very important factor in keeping our microbiome. So conclusion, there's a strong scientific evidence suggesting that circadian rhythm fasting combined with a healthy diet, like we spoke, the Mediterranean, and lifestyle can be particularly effective in weight loss, especially for people at risk for diabetes, because we're giving the body a break from producing insulin. So circadian rhythm fasting is called time-restricted eating plan, where you eat during daylight and you fast during night. So hence my Ramadan, when it falls in the winter, depending on the lunar calendar, can even have more health benefit than when it doesn't align with our circadian rhythm. So that was it. I hope it was informative enough and not, there's a lot we can talk about in this topic. So I will pass it on to Dina now, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Well, that was really helpful and very relevant, not because it's just Ramadan season, it's just because intermittent fasting is really a lifestyle for a lot of people. And we're ready to take questions, and I'm actually going to start, if you allow me, with the first question, and I'll open the floor for the rest. So you had mentioned at one point that with the drop of insulin, it's that when weight loss starts happening. Hence the intermittent fasting and the drop of insulin. However, there's another diet that's going on lately, is that people actually snack on small meals throughout the day, like 6 small meals, and then that actually naturally will keep their insulin levels high. However, they do experience weight loss. So how do you reconcile those two methods?
Thank you, Dina, for the question. So again, I like to call it a lifestyle more than a diet. And when it comes to losing weight, you can gain weight by eating 6 small frequent meals or snacks, or you can even lose weight. At the end, it all depends to the caloric consumption, if you're creating that energy deficit. So for athletic, they have a different kind of metabolism. They're burning off glucose constantly and glycogen from the muscles. So that's why maybe it's more beneficial in performance to be eating small frequent meals. But it doesn't mean that intermittent fasting does not have any health benefit. We did review the slide about the cognitive function, but in that group of people, I would say eating small frequent meals may be more beneficial than somebody who's not athletic, because they're burning off glucose much faster.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Would you like me to read the questions, Lara?
Yes. Yeah, please.
I have a question from Carla, and she is asking, how do you mix fasting with keto? Would you recommend it?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, this makes me smile, because I do see that in my clinics as well. Patient coming, like they're excited, they lost 30 pounds, but then they have a cholesterol level of 400 and an LDL of 200. So I am not necessarily against cutting down on carb. Absolutely not. I mean, for a lot of people with insulin resistance, it is good to cut down on carb because you give your body a break from insulin. But I don't necessarily recommend a ketogenic style, which is very, very high in fat. So the ketogenic diet is based on 75% fat. People are having butter in coffee and whipped cream in coffee. I mean, these are all saturated fat, and we still know that it blocks the artery. We have a cardiothoracic surgeon, Bassam, here. He can speak more about the effect of saturated fat on our heart health. But you can do low carb diet with intermittent fasting, and it's definitely more beneficial, like I spoke, because you're giving really your pancreas a good break from producing insulin.
Awesome. I have a question from Adib, and he's asking, what is the minimal period in terms of days per week for the intermittent fasting to be beneficial?
Very good question. We don't have data about the time, how much. I mean, the more you do it, we do have data on 30 days. You can go 30 days fasting and you'll be fine. You want to do 1 day, you want to do 2 days, 3 days, great. And like I said, it's all about what you consume and how much you give your pancreas a break. You want to do 4 or 5 days, go for it if you can, or maybe it's for a lot of my patients, they do it as it's a lifestyle. They are on intermittent fasting constantly. They stop eating at 4 p.m., 5 p.m. So it's not harmful to do it on a daily basis, and it's not harmful, and it's not beneficial to do it only once a week. Yeah. I do have private questions as well. So let's go through your questions then, Dina, and then respond.
Yeah, let me know. Okay, I have Tamam, and he would like to know, what do you recommend for people who are doing intermittent fasting in countries with hot climates, such as Dubai?
Yeah, very good question. In that case, I would say You have to make sure you're very well hydrated before you start the fast. That's really what you have to do. You're not going to be, if you're going to be out in the desert for 5 hours working, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're going to be home where it's, cooled, there's air conditioning, it's okay as long as you're well hydrated before that. But if you're somebody who's going to be out on the field with the sun, I mean, it's a belief, but at the end, I mean, we also, we have to think about our health as well, right? I mean, God has given us a brain to have a proper judgment. If you are on the field for 6 hours in the sun, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're home and well hydrated, so be it. You can do it, because we can stay without water for even 24 hours if we're well hydrated before we start the fasting.
Awesome. I have Camille. When you mention intermittent fasting, not during Ramadan, how does drinking water, tea, and other beverages impact the fasting benefits?
Yeah, it's okay, Camille. You can have the water, you can have the tea. It has to do with what you add to your tea and coffee. I mean, if you add sugar and cream, you're breaking that mechanism of the fat breakdown. So if it's a tea without sugar and cream and water, please do it. And if it's not Ramadan, even when I do intermittent fasting myself, I wouldn't go without water. I would still drink water. So it's only in Ramadan that, we stop everything, water and food, for the time we fast.
Okay. Bassam would like to know, how does suhoor affect circadian rhythm and energy metabolism, and do you recommend it?
Yeah, it's also an important point. So if you're breaking the suhoor, let's say 4 a.m., and then you're eating at 8, so you're still going through 16 hours of fasting. So you're still not affecting the circadian rhythm. You're still going through that fat breakdown, lipolysis, and gluconeogenesis. And I actually do recommend it, because you can get hydrated, you can get maybe a fig or two. So that would give at least your body, especially if you're going to be working, because your brain cells require glucose. We're not talking about depriving your body completely. It's only during the period of fasting. And you start at 4 a.m., that's the suhoor, and then you break it at 8. So there's still 16 hours. So it's good. And you're still not disrupting. It's good for the circadian rhythm, if we think about it this way, because we're supposed to eat at daytime, when we start the day, when we need our brain functioning. So it's a healthy thing to eat at suhoor.
All right. We have Lina Salman, because we have a few Linas. She's saying, hi, Lara. Thank you for this very insightful, I believe, lecture. Is intermittent fasting recommended for women who suffer from, or who are pre-diabetic, or who have hormonal imbalance?
Actually, it is very beneficial for pre-diabetic and for people with thyroid, because, like I said, it does give the body a break from insulin. Because diabetes, pre-diabetes, and that's what I specialize in, and hormonal imbalance, it's all about insulin resistance. So this group of people do have some kind of resistance to insulin. So intermittent fasting is very beneficial. The only time I wouldn't recommend it is if I have a patient on insulin. That's a different story. But for polycystic ovarian syndrome, for hypothyroidism, for pre-diabetes, I encourage intermittent fasting. It's actually a good way to give the pancreas a break from producing insulin.
And we have Rania. Thank you for sharing all this valuable info. Do you have any recommendations for pre-diabetics, and how and if intermittent fasting could help in managing pre-diabetes status? Please address a number of hours that would be helpful if intermittent fasting can be helpful.
Yeah, so it's good that these two questions came after. It's a good timing. Yes, I do recommend intermittent fasting, and I do recommend mixing it with low carb. So carb controlled, increase healthy fat a little bit so you can speed up the lipolysis, but as long as it's fat from healthy source. And I wouldn't recommend fasting less than 12 hours. So you can go ahead and do intermittent fasting for 12 hours, 12 to 14 hours, and control your carbohydrate. You're not going to stop drinking water or tea, but it will help. I mean, I see patients doing it 2-3 times a week, and it does help. So especially for this group of population, because of the insulin resistance they have.
Awesome. We have another question from Lena, same Lena. And then I think that would be the last bit from my end, unless I get something else, and we can address your direct messages as well. So Lena's asking, again, she's saying, hi, Lara, this is very informative. Thank you. How do you compare the effectiveness of losing weight during intermittent fasting between men and women? And if a friend who does, well, I see two separate questions. If a friend who does 12 hours of intermittent fasting during weekdays and then 24 hours on the weekends, so she has a friend who does that, is this a good idea and would you recommend it?
Okay, to answer the first one, again, depending on the metabolism and the calorie consumption, it's beneficial for both because they both, go through lipolysis and a break from producing insulin. So there was no, I didn't encounter in my research that it's a study specifically comparing men and women. But again, men have a higher metabolism. They tend to burn off more glucose. So they might see the health benefit more like faster, I would say, just like the study where the blood pressure dropped. Maybe it takes us more effort to reach that point, but it's beneficial for both. But like I said, depending on the hormonal composition, we tend to be more insulin resistant if we have those other factors that I talked about, the polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it's effective for both, to answer the question. And losing weight, it might be faster for men to lose weight with intermittent fasting due to the fact that they have a higher metabolism. The other question, 12-hour intermittent fasting during weekday, 24-hour. I'm not a fan of the 24-hour, to be honest, because that can interrupt, that's prolonged fasting starvation. And I didn't pick any study with that because I find it, I just don't encourage it. But if somebody wants to do it, that's fine. I would recommend the 12 to 16 hours where you go through the fat breakdown because you really don't want to affect your circadian rhythm as well. That's a very important point. So, but to say it's harmful, I wouldn't say it's harmful at all. I have a colleague that actually fasts for, you're not going to believe that, for a whole week. She only drinks water for a whole week. She does it 1 week a year. She said it's a good mental exercise. Kudos for her for doing that. But from a health point of view, I'm not sure if it's something I would recommend, doing a 24-hour. Yeah.
I actually do have a couple more. Dara, Samira is asking, would skipping breakfast and starting eating late during the day would be helpful as intermittent fasting? And how abstinence from water help with fasting from food?
Okay, first we talked about circadian rhythm. So actually I don't recommend skipping breakfast. I would recommend to keep breakfast as your main meal, and then stop eating or start the intermittent fasting later at 4 p.m. or 3 p.m. because of the circadian rhythm. So it's better if you do the fasting at night and you eat during the day, vice versa. And then, and not vice versa. And how abstaining from water help with fasting from food? It doesn't help. It's just the same. It's just, we have to make sure we're well hydrated. That's just a belief. In Ramadan, we abstain from everything. It's just a belief that, that's another subject. But in reality, when you do the intermittent fasting, you really don't have to be off water. And it doesn't, so being off water is not helping and it's not harming, if I answer the question. Yeah.
Awesome. And I have Sakina. Salam, Lara. How does intermittent fasting impact migraine sufferers?
Yeah. So, I did have one of those days where I had a really severe migraine a week ago when I was fasting. And usually it just happened once and it wasn't pleasant. I didn't encounter a study particularly on migraine and intermittent fasting, but I would say if you have something, if you constantly suffer from migraine, and it's intermittent fasting is actually causing it, then don't do it. But if intermittent fasting is helping you, maybe your glucose goes up and that can aggravate the migraine. It depends on what you eat. So it really depends on your situation. You can try it. Like I said, eat during the day and then fast at night. You might have, your migraine might improve because you probably don't have a high sugar if that's related to sugar, or maybe there's no relation in your case, or it might not help. But I would say take some medication before you start the fasting. Make sure you're well hydrated because a lot of time we get those migraines if we're dehydrated as well. So make sure you're well hydrated, make sure you take some pills and then see how it works. Yeah.
Actually, Samira does have a follow-up. She says, sorry, I meant combination of water and food together compared to food alone with respect to effect on body organs.
So do you mean, Samira, abstaining from water and food together compared to food alone? That's Ramadan. I mean, if that's what, maybe I didn't understand it well, but I think
Yeah.
what meant, yeah. So the Ramadan fasting, this is, so abstaining from water and food is only in Ramadan. So like I said, that's a religious belief. But the other intermittent fasting that's addressed in the medical community is we're not abstaining from water. You know, you still drink water. You can still drink tea, coffee with no sugar and milk. So that's why I said Ramadan fasting is a form of intermittent fasting where you actually eat dawn to sunset, fast dawn to sunset, and then you don't drink water and no food. So comparing it, it's a form of intermittent fasting. That's what it is. Like I said, depending on the time you break the fast and what are you consuming, high fat, high calorie at 8 p.m., eating till 11 p.m., you know. So a lot of people do gain weight on Ramadan, but you still get the benefit during the fasting of DNA repair, cell regeneration, and giving the body a break from insulin.
I think we're caught up. Bassam is also kind of saying thank you, Lara, for all that valuable information. I'm not sure. I'm caught up at my end. So if you want to catch up on your questions as well.
I think I was following while you were talking, Dina. These were the questions, that we got. So I hope I answered all of your questions, and I hope they were clear. If you have more questions, we do see messages coming. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you. And I do believe, Justin, I can pass that to you, that we will have this webinar available for all our chapter members and friends.
Yep, we should have a recording up sometime next week for the chapter to share, either on social media or through another method. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I'm always here if you have questions. AUB friends, AUB family, AUB faculty, thank you again. And I hope you stay safe and healthy during this time.